2015, Austria threw its doors wide open. 10 years later, it runs one of the toughest border regimes in all of Europe. The moment that flipped everything started with a single truck on a highway. For decades, Austria was a symbol of calm and stability. Clean cities, quiet mountains, nothing dramatic. Then one summer, that image cracked wide open. In 2015, Europe opened its borders to hundreds of thousands of refugees, and Austria found itself standing on the front line. It faced the biggest crisis it had seen in decades. The reason was geography. The main Balkan route ran straight through the country, from Greece through Macedonia, Serbia, and Hungary, toward Germany and Scandinavia. For hundreds of thousands of people, Austria was just a transfer station, a place to pass through, but for Austria, it was the start of chaos. In a short time, tens of thousands crossed the border, often with no documents, no plan, and no control. Trains full of migrants rolled into Vienna, one after another. Along the highways, columns of people appeared on foot. Some walked toward Germany, others stayed, hoping Austria itself would give them shelter. Then came the number that shocked the country. In 2015 alone, Austria received over 90,000 asylum applications, 3 times more than the year before. That was more than 1% of the entire population. In 12 months, it pushed Austria to the top of the most burdened countries in Europe. One place became the symbol of the chaos. Traiskirchen, a reception center built for 1,800 people. At one point, it held almost 4,000. Cameras showed tents pitched on the lawns because there was no room left inside. And then something happened that no slogan could excuse. A truck stood parked beside the A4 highway. Inside were 71 bodies, people who had suffocated during a smuggling run out of Hungary. Austria saw something it could no longer explain away with humanitarian slogans. It was proof the whole system had collapsed. From that moment, the tone of the debate changed completely. Fear and uncertainty spread through the public, and among politicians, one belief hardened fast: close the border before it is too late. The new message was blunt: compassion cannot replace security. Openness cannot replace the stability of the state. A year later, in 2016, forces recorded another 42,000 attempts to cross the border illegally. Protests hit the streets. The media started using 2 phrases again and again: loss of control and the end of European solidarity. Austria stood before a choice: keep the doors open or lock them shut, and it chose a new era: security over solidarity. In 2016, the parliament did something that a year earlier felt impossible. It passed an emergency law. From then on, asylum claims could be rejected right at the border, without ever being processed. Only a few humanitarian exceptions were allowed. At the same time, the right to family reunification was cut back. The language of politics had changed entirely. No more talk of compassion and help. Now it was public order, the stability of the state, and a border that must be respected. But the biggest shift was still coming. In 2017, a 31-year-old took power. Sebastian Kurz, a conservative who built his whole career on one promise: the year 2015 will never happen again. Kurz had been foreign minister just years earlier. He read the public mood like few others. Instead of fighting the fear, he named it out loud and used it. He formed a coalition with the far-right Freedom Party, the FPO. For years, they had demanded closed borders and deportations of illegal migrants. The new interior minister, Herbert Kickl, went even further. He suggested Austria consider leaving the European Convention on Human Rights if it blocked deportations. Words that would have been a scandal a few years earlier now sounded to many citizens like plain common sense, and the results came almost instantly. In a single year, asylum applications fell from over 90,000 to around 22,000. A massive drop, but something else fell too. Positive attitudes toward integration sank to a record low, just 36.5%. Austria was changing, not only in its politics, but in its mindset. To some, Kurz was a symbol of courage, the man who did what others were afraid to do. To others, he was the beginning of the end of European solidarity. But one thing was certain: for Austria, the border became more than a line on a map. It became a statement that the country would no longer be a waiting room for all of Europe. Since 2015, mixed patrols worked the southern borders. Soldiers and police checked cars, searched luggage, and stopped vans. This was now everyday life. At the Spielfeld crossing with Slovenia, temporary fences went up. Wire barriers and concrete blocks. At peak hours, forces there could process up to 6,000 people in 12 hours. But the real flashpoint was the Brenner Pass, on the border with Italy. In 2016, Austria announced a fence and armored vehicles deployed high in the Alps. They feared a new wave arriving through Italy and Libya once the Balkan route closed. Italy was furious. Prime Minister Matteo Renzi called the plan brazenly against the spirit of Europe. Austria did not back down. In 2017 came threats to put the army on the streets if the flow spiraled again. Police ran constant checks on trucks and buses across every major transit route. Drivers complained about queues and bureaucracy, but most of the public called it necessary because Austrians knew how easily tragedy could repeat, and it did. In 2023, history came full circle. A van carrying 22 migrants from Turkey and Syria crashed in Germany just after leaving Austria. 7 people died. Nobody doubted anymore that the border was daily reality. But hard borders were only half the picture. The other half played out inside the country, in laws, in offices, and in the daily lives of those already there. After 2016, Austria steadily tightened residency rules. People granted protection no longer got permanent asylum, instead a temporary permit for 3 years, with no guarantee of stability. Every decision could be reversed, every case reopened. In practice, it meant one thing: nobody could be sure of tomorrow. Uncertainty became a deliberate tool of deterrence. In 2019, the government pushed further. The basic refugee benefit was 563 or €655 a month. It could rise to 863, but only under one condition: you had to pass a German language test. No language meant less money, and a 5-year waiting period was added. For the first 5 years, most social benefits were off limits. Most Austrians backed it as a return to common sense. In 2023, the rules got harder still. Migrants were assigned community work, cleaning streets, working in parks, helping in care homes. Refuse and you lost your benefits. Human rights groups called it forced. Low-paid labor meant to discourage rather than integrate. Then came a new idea: carrot instead of stick. The government offered €500 to anyone who agreed to return home voluntarily. But that was nothing next to what came in 2023. Austria signed a deal with the United Kingdom. Asylum claims made in Austria could now be processed outside the borders of the European Union. It was a version of the famous Rwanda model. The idea was simple and brutal. Instead of letting migrants in, send them to third countries to wait for a decision. Chancellor Karl Nehammer called it a breakthrough. He said Europe needs the courage to defend its borders, even beyond them. The goal, he argued, was to break the smuggling business. The logic was blunt. If people know they will not automatically be let into the Union, they will not risk their lives at sea or pay the gangs. But across Europe, the decision landed like a shock. A country in the very center of the continent had not just accepted the Rwanda model, it had helped shape it, and Austria was not done rewriting the rules. At the end of 2022, Vienna stunned Brussels. It vetoed Romania and Bulgaria joining the Schengen zone. The official reason was fear of more illegal crossings from the Balkans. Unofficially, diplomats called it political pressure to force a tougher common migration policy. Vienna held the line for 2 years until the end of 2024. A small country had frozen the whole machinery of the Union. Then Austria went on the attack with money. It proposed €2 billion from the EU budget to strengthen Bulgaria's border with Turkey. Not just a wall, but cameras, drones, sensors, and guards. Vienna stopped reacting to Brussels. It started shaping it. Then it pointed the pressure outward. Countries like India, Morocco, and Nigeria got an ultimatum: take back your citizens or your visas get cut. A small Central European state was threatening world powers with visa sanctions. Bold, but Vienna knew one thing: Europe listens to those who act with force. In November 2024, Austria played a key role in a pan-European police operation against migration crime. Over 450 officers took part. 25 people were arrested, 6 of them in Austria. In just a decade, Austria went from the front line of solidarity to the guard of its own borders. Yet other European states never managed it. France, once a symbol of power, is now the example of a country without control, and that is a whole other story.